This is Leafs Morning Take with Nick Alberga and Jay Rosehill.
Now we've got a fight started here right off the bat with Rosehill.
30 minutes of live, nonstop Leafs talk starts now.
Gotta love when a week starts on a Tuesday. That's because it's Friday already, my friends. Let's get after it. Presented by Botano. It's the Friday edition of Leafs Morning Take. Nick Alberga with you. My main man, Jay Rosehill, will be by in about 5 minutes or so for another installment of 3 Hits with Rosie. I took a peek at what he had to say in his installment. Of course, it is taped when we play it on this show. And a lot of it will be around John Scott, who was our guest yesterday, who is bringing hot take after hot take. And Rosie's sort of going to react, I think, a bit to what John Scott had to say, and a lot of weapons of mass destruction thrown from the mouth of John Scott yesterday. One including Austin Matthews saying he was leaving Toronto in free agency. I can't get that far, but again, we expect a lot from this Maple Leafs franchise. I would say over the next month, leading into July 1, to see what transpires. Who's going to be the new GM? Who's going to be the new coach? So many questions. And with that in mind, I have the perfect person to try and start to answer some of those. Frank Seravalli, the NHL insider of all NHL insiders, hockey insider and president of hockey content for Daily Faceoff. He'll stop by at about 10. He'll update us on Toronto's GM search and maybe Pittsburgh's as well. It feels like Kyle Dubas could be popping up somewhere sometime next week. And you all know watching this show, I've been waiting to say that since, last Monday, when he vividly said in his podium when he was still a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's not like he was going to be popping up anywhere next week. And here we are, 15 days, not even later. And Kyle Dubas is no longer with the Leafs, and he's been flirting with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But I don't fault him at all. He was let go by the Leafs. So you got to move on in life sometimes. And it sounds like maybe Pittsburgh will be that destination for Kyle Dubas. So we're keeping close tabs on that. Frank Seravalli is coming up in about 5 or so. Remember to subscribe, tap that like button, leave us a review wherever you're checking us out, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. Again, at the Leafs Nation 401 on YouTube. If you just stumbled upon this show right now and are not subscribed, what are you waiting for? At the Leafs Nation 401, where you could subscribe, get your daily videos, your shorts, everything you want regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs. We got you covered. Additionally, we're available wherever you find your podcast. Just search Leafs Morning Take. And don't forget to visit theleafsnation.com for the very latest on all things Toronto Maple Leafs. Thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns, drop us a line in the chat down below here on YouTube. We'll get to some of those a bit later on in the show. But for now, let's get over the boards. So this is my big question heading into another weekend without a general manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs, albeit it's only the second weekend in a row without a GM because the whole Dubas thing went down last Friday. But what's the timeline looking for in time to place and announce a new GM? Like it's May 26th as we have this conversation right now. The NHL draft, of course, is June 28th, at least night one, June 29th for night two in Nashville. And then July 1st in free agency, not to mention the Stanley Cup Finals about to get underway, could start as early as next Wednesday. Like there's so many question marks, and yet this GM search goes on, and there's not many names out there. Brad Treliving is the only name that surfaced, I would say, in the last week since Brendan Shanahan made that announcement, that podium, whatever you want to call it, the addressal that Kyle Dubas wasn't coming back. And it just leads me to believe, and this is just speculation on my part, that if there's nobody else out there, then you would have to think Brad Treliving's the guy they pinpointed from day one, and they're talking logistics. Having said that, maybe they're waiting for somebody. I think that's a key conversation to have as well. Maybe it's Jim Nill. I know Carla Koliakova of TSN 1050, former Leaf, yesterday threw the name Jim Nill out there. Of course, is the relationship as well with Brendan Shanahan. And so, you start to wonder as the days go on, and there's not new and fresh names that come to the conversation, you start to wonder if it's Brad Treliving or are they waiting for somebody? I just think it's so unique that, they said last week, they being Brendan Shanahan last Friday, that they want to put a bit of pressure and time is of the urgency. And now they're sort of taking their time with this decision. And I get it. Like, I think you want to be frank, for lack of a better term, with this decision. Make sure you're picking the right guy. But I think to that point, you also have to be a bit urgent and understand that, hey, there's a lot of big time decisions to be made. So you got to bring in a GM. And I'm sure a lot of the heavy lifting anyways is being done by Brandon Pridham and company. But still, it's very, very fascinating to see who that man's going to be that comes into the mix and is the next general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I just wonder more so about the timeline. Like, if we have this conversation a week from now, is there a new head honcho in town? Is it Brad Treliving? Is it somebody else? Like, what's the time frame for a decision? Is it early June? Is it, the second week of June? Like, time is of the essence, I think, which we don't realize to a degree here, it being May 26th, and more so just the decisions ahead for the brass, whoever takes over as the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And this will be collective, of course, of Brendan Shanahan, the new GM, the assistant GMs, the scouting staff, everybody involved. Like, there's so many big decisions regarding big time trades, the draft's coming up, what to do with a head coach. Like, and that's why I just wonder when they're going to actually make this decision. But that is the very latest. It's not much. And Frank Seravalli is coming up. Maybe he can uncover a bit more on that. But for now, as mentioned, as I tease off the top, the one and only Jay Rosehill, another 3 hits segment coming your way.
Hey folks, welcome back to 3 Hits with Rosie. Man, yesterday we had John Scott on the show, and he, without a shadow of the doubt, said Austin Matthews is gone in his mind. He goes, he's not coming back. There's no way he's coming back. He probably doesn't want to be here. He's not even from here. Rattled off all the reasons that Austin Matthews is not coming back. Me and Nick were both like, whoa, because we haven't got to that conclusion yet, but that's his conclusion, and he's always got the hot takes, man, and there's reason to believe he won't. I'm not of the opinion yet that he is gone, but that brings me to my number 2 point. I believe Mitch Marner will be gone. I think he's the most likely to go. I think he has the least to give in playoffs if they're trying to build a stronger, tougher, more playoff-oriented team. I think you can build it more around Austin Matthews. I think he is their number one guy. He's their franchise player. I think they're going to put a tag on him, and he's capable of getting 62 goals or whatever. We all know. And has he been up to snuff in the playoffs? No. But like we mentioned again on yesterday's show, guys like Alexander Ovechkin and guys like Steven Stamkos had that tag hanging on them for a while too, until they got it done. So I think if they're going to build around anyone, it will be Austin Matthews. My take is that Mitch Marner will be gonzo. And as crazy as that will look, what do we get in return? There's lots of people on Twitter throwing out their mock trades and their fantasy GM ideas, which is always pretty cool to look at. Some of them are absolutely obscene and ridiculous. Some of them make you think. Some of them make you wonder if that's even possible. So lots to be coming forward with. Again, go back and check out our John Scott interview. He had tons to talk about, and he never holds back, which is always awesome. But number 3, in this GM search, Nick even said it yesterday, it's a foregone conclusion that Tree Living will be coming in to be the general manager. And I'm just like, fuck, I hope not. He's the first name that came up. There wasn't a whole lot of other names tossed around. And again, who knows what's going on in the background, behind the scenes. Maybe they're rolling through new names every single day. But again, I've tweeted this before and I've said it. Why not Ray Shero? I mean, the guy's got the pedigree, he's got the background, he's got the history, he's got the experience. Let's go with this guy. Does he want the job? Have they talked to him? If you had a perfect world where you had your choice of both, I mean, I know Shero's been out as a GM for a little while, but Tree Living's just getting off the horse, and he's fresh. I get that. But, I mean, think of the modern day, I don't know if you call it a dynasty necessarily, but what the Pittsburgh Penguins were in the 2010s there was nothing short of exceptional. They built like a phenomenal team around some unbelievable mix of talent and leadership and workhorses and guys playing over their head, and they drafted well. They got a goalie. They had their stud D-man. It was unbelievable what they built there in Pittsburgh, and why not let Ray Shero step in and try his hand at building that in Toronto?
As per usual, Jay Rosehill just bringing the intensity, just staring a death hole into that camera and saying he wants Ray Shero. So let's find out as much as we can find out right now with Frank Seravalli, the one and only. Frank, thank you so much for doing this. I guess we can start with that conversation. What's the latest you're hearing on the GM search here?
Nick, not much. I think it's one of those things. It was such a bombshell on Friday, and I think everyone had sort of already scribbled down some notes like, hey, what about this guy, or this guy, getting together their own sort of list on the back of a napkin. That I think I don't want to say it's been slow moving. I think it's obvious that they've been in contact with Brad Treliving. I don't have a real good sense of where they're at in the process. Have they begun the formal interview stage? Are they still gathering their list? I think it's a little bit slow to this point, but to be expected. We're exactly 1 week away from them parting ways with their general manager. So, to expect that someone would be in the chair already, I think is probably a little bit crazy.
Yeah, you're right. I think to me it's just fascinating that there's only been one true name that's sort of surfaced, and that's been, sticking clear the last week, right? Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but like if you were to handicap things right now from everything you hear, is like Brad Treliving obviously a high person of interest in this scenario?
Yeah, I think honestly, I have a hard time envisioning many other candidates. Like if the mandate truly is to get someone that has experience in the job, to think of some of the others that have been out there and had experience, their resume isn't really all that impressive. Like let's take someone, sort of fresh experience in Ron Hextall and say, okay, he has experience, but is he a candidate? And the answer is no. He just ruined 2 teams on either side of Pennsylvania. So take him off the list. He essentially takes himself off the list. Like you can go through, some of the other managers that are now in advisory roles, Bob Murray in Calgary, or Dean Lombardi in Philadelphia, or Ray Shero in Minnesota. Like you can go through the entire list, and not to say that they're not experienced or not candidates. It's just, I don't think, sort of what they have on their resume quite looks as good in terms of all the boxes that Brad Treliving checks. So not to say that other people won't be interviewed. Of course they will. The best way to frame his candidacy is, I think he's the odds-on favorite.
It's just interesting again because it is the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you would think a lot of people want this gig. So I started to wonder right off the bat on Friday when we heard the news if people would come out of the woodworks. And the name that started to surface in the last 24 hours, I know some Carlo Koliakovo of TSN 1050 in Toronto. The name Jim Nill, I believe he's got 1 year left on his contract. What's the chances that maybe that comes to fruition?
I mean, look, never say never, but I would say an incredibly small percentage. The last conversation that I had with Jim Nill, I guess going back to last year's draft, just caught up with him after the GM meetings, and we were actually talking about his contract, and he said that he got a 1 year extension. And I said, that's interesting. 1 year, like, are you okay with that? He said, no, I actually asked for it. He said, with this stage in my life, I'm getting close to retirement. 1 year, having that guaranteed is plenty enough for me. So he seemed to be very content with the spot that he was in. And obviously the Stars have had success, but to think that he's going to sort of step away from that, which seems unlikely. If anything, he's going to keep working. I think he's in a spot where he probably, if anything, stays in Dallas. So I would say quite a bit of a long shot. And so you were asking me who I think are some other names. I mean, I think the list is some of the other names that we've heard pop up in some other markets. I would imagine that at some point the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be speaking to Jason Botterill, Peter Chiarelli, Marc Bergevin. Like, go through the list of guys that have recent NHL experience, and you can kind of draw up your list from there.
At the very least, it sounds like they're doing their due diligence, I should say, and not rushing this process along again, because we're a week into things. Everything went down last Friday. What did you make of the report from the other day about Brendan Shanahan coming out when he made the decision to move on or part ways from, Kyle Dubas, whatever way you want to phrase it, that he pretty much went to the core four, the top 4 players in the team, whatever you want to call them, and said, hey, you don't have to worry about being moved. Is that just lip service, in your opinion?
I personally don't know how the president of the team can make such a declarative statement, especially without knowing who his general manager is. What is that person's vision? Unless this kind of goes back to the same exact conversation that we were having last week about Kyle Dubas, and the plan really isn't to give this person any autonomy, and the president is already coming in and making the decision. That would seem to be a real negative for the position, so I don't think that would be the case. And more than that, not to say it didn't happen, I'm just curious as to when exactly it happened. Brendan Shanahan, just for a matter of fact, was not in the exit interviews. The only people that were in the room were Kyle Dubas and I believe Sheldon Keefe. So I don't think there was anything, again, not to say it didn't happen, but to think that there's some kind of declarative statement made without a GM in place doesn't make sense to me. And let's color it with some experience too, like having been around for a while and seen and heard some of these conversations. Like I've been in situations where I've heard a general manager tell a player he's not going to be traded 24 hours before it happens, sitting in a chair right in front of him in his office. Things happen all the time. And I think if that was a conversation that took place, it was probably one of those ones to just calm everyone down and then readdress it from there. I mean, what's the very worst thing that happens? Someone calls you a liar after the fact. It's a lot better than saying, yeah, you know what, we're probably going to trade you, and having everyone freak out.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I thought of right when that came out. And I don't discount the report. Obviously, it makes me think back to PK Subban and Mark Bergevin. Like 2 days later, you're out the door. You were to the Nashville Predators. It's just what happens in the sports world. And I think maybe at that point in time, it was the right play by Brendan Shanahan. What can you tell us about your report from yesterday regarding the PA and Kyle Dubas' agent? What's the Coles notes of that story?
Yeah, so it's kind of an in the weeds, inside baseball type of story, but essentially there's been a number of agents that are certified by the NHLPA that have essentially, for lack of a better phrase, lodged a complaint with the PA, and now they're reviewing the fact that Kyle Dubas is represented by Chris Armstrong from Wasserman. He's in a separate arm and division of Wasserman, but he works at the same firm as the one that represents Austin Matthews among 70 other players in the NHL. And so the agents are sort of crying foul, saying, look, that's a no-go. That's been expressly prohibited from NHLPA regulations and meetings. I can't find anywhere, Nick, in the black and white that says that's the case. It says agents are prohibited from representing executives and GMs and coaches, but it doesn't say agencies. So I don't believe that anything nefarious has taken place. I believe Chris Armstrong is a longtime friend of Kyle Dubas and someone that agreed to represent him here. I think everything is sort of on the up and up in terms of it being an arm's length transaction. But when you get to the point that the NHLPA tells you that they're reviewing the matter, well, that's a story. And so Kyle Dubas also knows better that this would be perceived as a conflict of interest because he also knew all of these regulations and was subject to them as a former player agent. So I think Kyle Dubas knew better and probably should have, if he needed representation, picked someone else. But nonetheless, that's the spot that we're in now. I think the big thing is with a new regime in place in Marty Walsh at the NHLPA, is he going to put a stake in the ground? Is there going to be any sort of punishment? It wouldn't be towards Kyle Dubas. It wouldn't be towards Chris Armstrong. It would be towards Wasserman, which represents 71 NHL players, including some of the biggest stars in the game, Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, Roman Josi, etc.
Any idea what a punishment like that would look like, Frank? Like that's the thing that came to my mind right away. Is like, what's the punishment if you're found guilty of that?
Well, I think, honestly, I don't know, but I would say one of the big things would be to change the regulation as well, that you can't have someone down the hall in your same office, representing someone on the other side of the table. And that's really the biggest issue for these other agencies that are complaining. It's not that they, essentially they do have issue with it, of course, but the idea is they're like, we keep our shop squeaky clean. Like we have a hockey division at our agency and we only represent hockey players. So we have other parts of our agency that represent coaches and media and all these other things, but we don't dabble in hockey executives and coaches, and frankly shouldn't be allowed to based on the information that could be traded back and forth and the horse trading. So they're saying, like, we don't do it. Many other places don't do it because that's what we believe the regulations to be. Why should Wasserman be any different?
Got it. Thank you for clearing that up. Last question before we let you go. Kyle Dubas, is this trending towards him being president GM in Pittsburgh?
If he wants it, I mean, that's the belief that I have and many others, is that the Pittsburgh Penguins are ready to turn the reins over. It sort of seems like the fact that they put their entire search on hold, and I've been in contact with, some of the people that have gone really deep in the process in Pittsburgh that feel like they're still in the mix, but have been told now they're in a holding pattern. And so when you see a search that was nearing its very final stages screech to a halt, that indicates that there's a preferred candidate elsewhere out there, and that would be Kyle Dubas. I think his stay in Pittsburgh earlier this week was short. I think one of the reasons why there's been a bit of a delay in the process has been because, for one, Kyle Dubas needs time to make up his mind. You heard him say just 10 days ago that he wouldn't be the guy that jumps back into hockey right away. I think that was all sort of blown out the window once the Leafs, essentially punted him. And now they're in a spot where Fenway Sports Group and their ownership, they're over at the Grand Prix in Monaco having a great time on the yacht scene. And so I don't think they're kind of, everyone's waiting here. What's Kyle Dubas going to say? Because it seems like they want him for sure. The question is, does he want the Pittsburgh Penguins? To me, Nick, that job has never really made sense for Kyle Dubas. He's maybe one of the 2 or 3, executives in hockey that could have his pick of what's available. And to think that Pittsburgh, with all their best hockey behind them and a massive, painful rebuild coming, that would be the job that he chooses. But again, I don't know what else is being offered by Fenway Sports. Maybe that's a really attractive opportunity, as Kyle Dubas loves soccer and loves all these other, sports. Maybe he could have some sort of executive vice president of strategy where he has his hands in a whole bunch of different things that might get him really excited. I'm just spitballing, but maybe it's not on the surface just what it seems. So we'll see.
Looking forward to seeing what transpires in all departments, Toronto, Pittsburgh, Kyle. Thank you so much for this, Frank. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Have a good one, Nick.
Take care. That's Frank Seravalli, of course, the one and only NHL insider from Daily Faceoff, the president of hockey content and hockey insider for Daily Faceoff. Appreciative of his time here on this Friday. So essentially, that's the Coles notes of everything transpiring right now, and that's been consistent with all the reports that Brad Treliving, again, is the only name that has surfaced. And Frank threw some other names out there. And again, we knew this was going to happen, where there's going to be a lot of overlap with some of the other teams looking for general managers. So I'm not at all shocked by that. But again, this is just pure opinion. If Brad Treliving's name surfaced on Friday and it's been consistent with that, it leads me to believe, at least in my world, that I think Brad Treliving's the guy. It just, I don't know, you go a week and there's one name that comes out. You would think there would be other names that surface, like Eric Tulsky and, list a name. Ray Shero, as Rosie mentioned earlier. The fact that hasn't come out, it just leads me to believe, considering how time sensitive this whole debate is, this whole search is, that nobody's come out. It just leads me to believe, at least. And maybe I can be entirely wrong. Maybe we show up on Monday for that show and it's somebody entirely different has entered the picture. But that's just my opinion. Many thanks to Frank Seravalli. He's the absolute best, making some time for us and answering a lot of these tough questions as we move forward here in this GM search for the Maple Leafs. But for now, the Betano Wrap is presented by Betano.ca. The game starts now, 19 plus. Please play responsibly. First and foremost, folks, I have to give major props to my co-host, Jay Rosehill. He ripped it last night. He had the first period over, as he called here on this show, between Vegas and Dallas. And then to make things even better, I hope he parlayed it. He had that game going to overtime. And then lo and behold, it goes to OT, and Joe Pavelski scores in the power play, and the Dallas Stars stave off elimination. They force a Game 5 in Vegas on Saturday night. That was the big news coming out of yesterday as well. They already announced when the Stanley Cup Final would get underway. Imagine being the Dallas Stars. Yeah, here's the schedule for the Stanley Cup Final. Mind you, they didn't say where the games were, but it's either going to start Wednesday or Saturday from my understanding. So Dallas forces a Game 5. We'll see if they can do it. Of course, right now in the NBA, we're seeing the Boston Celtics down 3-0 in that series, make it 3-2. And of course, they would have Game 7 on home court as well. Just really, really intriguing to see a team go down 0-3 and potentially come back. We'll see if it happens in either sport. But again, to my play today, I like the Blue Jays run line Call me crazy at plus money, plus 102. All right, for starters, they had a closed door meeting. I love those. Like, how often did those happen in professional sports? Like the cliche thing to do when you're playing like shit, playing like trash. Have a closed door meeting. But they had one yesterday after yet another loss at the Trop. I think it's hilarious. The Jays scored 20 runs like a couple days ago and then lost 3 or 4 in that series. It sort of makes you forget everything that transpired in a record-setting game, especially at a field of demons like Tropicana Field has been for so many years for the Toronto Blue Jays. But I like the run line in this game. They're visiting Minnesota. Kevin Gausman's on the hill. I know Alek Manoah has been really, really struggling, but Kevin Gausman, for all intents and purposes, is the ace of the Toronto Blue Jays. You're a stopper. This is why you get all the money. This is why you get paid the good coin, to be a stopper and stop a nasty skid. And now's the time for Kevin Gausman, and I expect the bats to wake up. So give me the run line for the Jays. If you can't go that far, just the money line against the Minnesota Twins. A big, big game, a massive game. The Blue Jays need to find a way to get the job done in Minnesota. All right, let's get to the chat. You guys have been fantastic. I want to start with my guy, Novocaine12. Nick was introduced to the pod for the first time this week. You do a fantastic job. Thanks for your work. Appreciate that, Novocaine12. Again, we are building steam, as you all know. So thankful to you all on a daily basis every week as we do this show. We get stronger and stronger, and we continue to build and build and build like any great team. That's the key word here over at Leafs Morning Take. So hop along with us. As mentioned earlier in the week, we'll be doing shows all the way until, I believe, the second day of free agency, at which point we'll scale things back. But we'll have the content you're looking for. Let's say there's a big trade in the middle of July. We'll be on top of it for you. I believe it's going to take a couple weeks. I think all of us here at the team are going to take a couple weeks at some point in time in the offseason. But what I'm getting at is you won't miss a beat when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And by the way, that was the plan when we started this endeavor back in October. So again, at the Leafs Nation 41, where you could subscribe. We're bringing the heat. We had Frank Seravalli on earlier today. A lot of you chiming in as it comes to the Big Four and what to do with them. Mark Dagrate saying, one of our frequent listeners, every GM has to answer to someone. Get it together. I think you're right. Sam writes in, what about you, Frank? You know it all. Imagine Frank Seravalli as the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that would be incredible. I think he would, quite frankly, do a great job at that. Boone writes in, I agree with Rosie. Marner will be gone. Little guy just doesn't have the grind or heart for playoff brutality. I get, when I played devil's advocate yesterday when it came to Jay Rosehill and our guest John Scott, devil's advocate in the fact that I've been pretty consistent in saying that I do think as well Mitch Marner needs to be the guy to go. But he's an exceptional player. And I think you run the risk if you trade a Mitch Marner of him ending up somewhere else, getting his hands on a new team, a new organization, a fresh start, whatever you want to call it, and him going absolutely bonkers and figuring it out, not to the extent of Matthew Tkachuk, but we all know how good Mitch Marner can be. It's just about putting it together when it matters most in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And quite frankly, a lot of players deal with that. Like I brought up Alex Ovechkin. I brought up Steven Stamkos. You're a winner, you're a loser until you're a winner, if that makes sense. And I think it really is truly hard to win in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, Jason Robertson's a perfect example of that. Had a decent first round against Minnesota. His face is on a milk carton in round 2. And now here in the third round, he's been outstanding, albeit it looks like Dallas is going to come up short against the Vegas Golden Knights. It just shows you the margin for error is razor thin, and you just have to be that dialed in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Sharp like attack, one of my favorites. Willie needs to go. So again, the consternation continues in this market of who needs to go. And the one thing I want to end right now, people need to stop ripping John Tavares to shreds. Okay, the guy's a point per game player. Yeah, he's slower, but it's never been his game. I covered John Tavares when he was in the Ontario Hockey League with the Austria Generals. He had a cup of tea, of course, to finish off with London Knights. Foot speed was never his thing. And if you watch the game intricately, like many people do, you'll notice John Tavares does a lot of great things, and it's not just with the puck. And this is not me just covering for him. He's a really, really exceptional player. He's just easy to whip. And I think he knew this coming to Toronto the way he did, electing and choosing to come home, putting on that C. It comes with a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight, a lot of heat. And I think John Tavares is perfect for that type of role. And I totally get it. But I think people need to stop bagging this guy, considering what he's done, where he came from, what decisions he made in the past. He's the least of the problems for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I think it'll be really fascinating over the next couple months. Michael Kirkpatrick, Just to wrap, I picked Marner as the one to go. He's a punk. It is what it is. Like, everybody's going to have their opinion. And the fact of the matter is, a good majority of us do not know these guys behind the scenes. So call them what you want. I just like to judge their play, and that's pretty much it. And what my expectations are for the player and what they make. And I think you need to rock the boat a bit. I think it started with Kyle Dubas. We'll see what happens with the head coach. I love Sheldon Keefe, but it could be time for a fresh voice behind the bench. And I am in the committee that suggests you make a franchise-altering move as well. Like, how many? I think it's a definition of insanity if you come back with the same nucleus next season, because they failed and failed and failed so many times before. So we'll leave it at that. Many thanks to all the new listeners and subscribers and everybody tuning in for the very first time today. Hope you enjoyed the Frank Seravalli interview. Hope you enjoyed Jay Rosehill. Just be here when he's live. He's incredible. He's our animal. He's our everything. He's our playoff warrior. So Jay Rosehill's back in the mix next week. Many thanks to producer Alex, Frank Seravalli, and of course, all to you in the chat. You are phenomenal. Have a great weekend. And again, if anything happens, we'll have you covered over at the Leafs Nation, at the Leafs Nation 401, where you can subscribe. I'm Nick Alberga. Thanks for listening and watching. Take care.